Hey listeners, this is Dan.
This is Justin.
This is Joe.
And welcome to a very experimental episode of Film Fanatics. We just hit the 1 year mark on the show. Congratulations again, guys. And we thought we'd mix it up a little bit with a video show for you this time. And what we've got on tap for you is If I Stay. We're going to review that. A couple of indie classics, or indie new classics, I should say, that we're going to catch up on. Boyhood and Calvalry. Our home media moment is going to be Alan Partridge. And in honor of Calvalry with Brendan Gleeson, we've got the top 5 Brendan Gleeson performances. And then our triple feature ends the show with This Is the End, Batman Under the Red Hood, Joe's pick for Old Classic, and as well Anchors Aweigh for our Oscar A to Z. So let's get it started with Justin, and that's going to be If I Stay.
Alright. Mia, played by Chloe Grace Moretz, has spent the majority of her life devoted to the cello when she draws the attention of Adam, played by Jimmy Blackley, an aspiring musician wanting to tour and gain recognition. Though after a disastrous incident leaves Mia an orphan, watching all the events in the hospital unfold outside of her body, Mia must find a reason to stay in this world or move on into the next. Chloe Grace Moretz is arguably one of my favorite young actresses that is, working in the business today, but it honestly bothers me that she gets stuck with projects like this. Admittedly, there's nothing all that truly awful about If I Stay, but it doesn't really have anything all that original, often relying on very stale teen romance tropes, such as the ever-cliche bad boy rocker boyfriend, and other things along that line. Also, the narrative for the beginning of the film bounces around all over the place, from Mia's parents before they had children, Mia's life before love, and flashing forward to her life in the hospital. It's a very strange balance, and it really doesn't manage to draw intrigue. Though, as the film goes on, it does get a little bit better, and had they devoted a little bit more time to certain things, it might have been a better end product, such as focusing on the turmoil of long-distance relationships. Unfortunately, this all ends up in a finale that will likely leave audiences just thinking to themselves, that's it. If I Stay is far from the worst thing I've seen this year, and I did honestly like some of the progression of the film, and I honestly don't think that Moretz has given us a truly bad performance, disregarding movie 43, and I leave it with a C.
Okay, Joe, what did you think of If I Stay?
If I Stay, I'm actually pretty much with you here, Justin. I think overall it was a kind of a mixed bag here. I think that Moretz is really kind of the star here. She is the central force of this film to really keep it blooming. But then again, she's great at everything. Really, for me, as I mentioned to you guys earlier, the biggest problem with this movie is that the best thing about it is not what's supposed to be the best thing about it, the hook, the supernatural elements, the whole out-of-body experience. That's the weakest part of the movie. The best part here is actually just some of the interactions with her love story, with her family, which really only really get snippets of. I thought that there were some original elements here, like her being kind of a fish out of water, being this individual who is into classical music while her family's a bunch of rockers. Normally it's kind of reversed. I like the fact that they kind of focused on it. That's something really different. But it really could have been much, much better fleshed out due to the focus on the characters being kind of mismanaged. I just wish that the time they spent in the out-of-body experiences had been cut out of the movie mostly, because they just go on way too long and they don't really go anywhere. They're just kind of there to pander to the audience. Overall, though, I have to agree with you, Justin. I give it a C as well.
Yeah, I'm pretty much with you guys. And Joe, you really hit on something. The biggest problem with the movie is the hook of the car accident, the hospital, basically everything that the trailer was.
Yes.
You didn't even realize from the trailer that it was in flashbacks at all.
No.
Because all they focused on was that kind of stuff.
It made you seem like the actual hook was going to be a bigger part of the movie.
Right.
Which it really isn't. The balance is definitely not there.
But that's the part that I didn't like. I loved the romance stuff. Justin, it is a little cliche, but I feel like, when it's written well and it's done right, you could get away with some cliches. Every romance movie isn't going to be different, from the next. So I was okay with that. I loved the angle of the parents. Her and her parents, her and her brother a little bit as well. Like, I really liked the family stuff, which we get only in the flashbacks, of course, because they're all in the accident. And really, there was only one, truly emotional scene, I felt, and that was when her grandfather, Stacy Keach, was visiting her hospital room and sort of talking to her in her comatose state. That was the only one that got me, like, choked up. For me, the big, female-centered, young adult romance of the summer goes to The Fault in Our Stars. I give this one a C+. Wasn't bad, but certainly they could have done more with what they had. But Moretz is great, as always. I think we can all agree with that.
I think that Stacy Keach really did give a good performance as well. I think that he did add some gravitas, and that was actually one of my favorite scenes. It was kind of the conversations that he had with her, with his granddaughter. I think were probably the best scenes in the whole movie.
Yeah.
And I remember there was one scene that was kind of subtle. It's actually when he's looking at her when she's performing for this big audition.
For Juilliard.
I mean, if there's no dialogue, there's just his expression as he looks at her. It tells everything. I mean, and then this following scene after that it preludes to, it's even better. So they capture that.
I really liked the scene after that when they were in the car together, and he was just being real honest with her. I don't know. I sort of liked the mother-daughter dynamic specifically because we see a lot where it's the rebellious daughter, like you mentioned, Joe.
All the time. It's
very rare that it's sort of flipped, and the daughter is the very reserved one, and the mom is, the rocker chick and whatever. The dynamic between the two I really liked. I thought that was good.
I felt the parents tried a little bit too hard with their roles. Like, yes, they had a couple of quirky moments. They were trying to get her daughter to have more fun, but I feel like they also bordered on ridiculous with some of their antics at times. Joe, apparently you agree.
That's possible.
I remember the scene that bugged me the most, that really took me out of the movie, is when he's actually invited to the family dinner with all these people, and
the boyfriend is, yeah.
The boyfriend gets stung. She gets stung by a bee, and so he just leans over and sucks the stinger out of her hand right in front of all the parents, and they're all just looking over, kissing each other, like, oh yeah, that's pretty hot.
Yeah.
And it's like,
they were into it.
I think that was just kind of awkward.
Yeah.
I just thought that something about that didn't sit quite right for me. I don't know about you guys. It was a little silly.
The other thing that kind of bothered me about it, though, with the parent dynamic is I'm okay with the movie having musicians as the main focus. And the one scene where they're covering, I believe it was a Smashing Pumpkins song.
Yep, at the campfire.
Was actually a really cool scene. But the stuff that's supposedly original is so generic and weak.
Yes, you're right on that.
The dad's band was Nasty Bruises.
Yeah.
I liked the dad's band better than the boyfriend's band, though.
It was okay. The boyfriend's band, I'll be honest, I thought that it was some of the most generic stuff, and they're trying to push him this really edgy cool musician.
Punk.
But it was not even punk.
It wasn't
like,
punk.
I don't even know if you'd call that alternative rock. It was just extremely basic chords. The lyrics were terrible.
The choruses were just the one line repeated like 3 times. That's the chorus.
The song.
It's like in every song.
And they are supposed to be getting a record deal, right? But the one song they show at their big show here is less than 2 minutes long. It's literally like the chorus, the verse, and then a chorus, and then
and then it's over.
This is not even an EP track. This is... What is this? This is not a demo? Come on.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah, I agree. And he's an alright singer. He did, all the singing himself, but the songs were not what I would call
glorious.
Glorious. That's true.
Didn't sell us.
No. And I mean, we talked about this, or I did at least, when we talked about Step Up a few weeks ago, where they were having this reality competition and the dancers moved forward that I thought were like, well, they weren't as good as some. So it's possible that people get record deals all the time that I don't think are that great. So I guess it's possible, but yes, it's a little off the mark, I would say, to give him this huge record deal, this character.
In the context of the movie, I think it was, at the very least.
Yeah.
Anything else to add to that, Justin?
I just think it was... I just feel like... It's like I said, I wish they had had better music to give you that feeling that these guys were these legit images. Instead, we have these very generic, formulaic songs that don't really get you to appreciate what they are and don't really sell it to the audience whatsoever.
Well, like Begin Again, and I know, we sort of had a disagreement on the show about the movie itself, but Justin, I think you would admit that the music in Begin Again...
You can see where they're coming from.
is really...
Like, wow.
You could see, okay, this girl might have a successful career. Yeah.
Something. Even if it's not necessarily your cup of tea, there's some element of talent there.
Right. All right, well, let's move on to our next film, and that is Boyhood. And this has been an indie, really taking people by storm this summer. It's 12 years in the making. Director Richard Linklater, from the Before series and many other things, took these actors and sort of filmed the life of a family a few weeks a year over 12 years. It starts when the boy is 6. It ends when he's 18. Ethan Hawke plays the father. Patricia Arquette plays the mother. L.R. Coltrane is the boy. And his sister is actually Linklater's daughter, Lorelai. And, when I saw the preview for this for the first time, I said to Justin, I think we're probably going to have the same #1 movie this year. I know you're a huge fan of the other long-form Linklater series, which is the Before series, as I mentioned. And after watching it, I don't know if it's going to be my favorite of the year, but I have to say, it's an astounding project.
No question.
It's brilliant in its scope, and it's very, very well done. To take these people through an entire childhood, basically, it is just phenomenal, and everyone just does a great job with it. The intercuts to move from year to year, I think, were a little bit too forced. They used a lot of music cues and cultural references from this particular year to that particular year. I would have liked a little more subtlety there. I think that if it were just a normally done, scripted movie, not done in this way, but done, with actors being different throughout the years, I think the script and the acting and stuff are enough to get it to an A- level. I wasn't blown away as much by the script itself, but the fact that this movie exists, the fact that, they got this made, this brilliant, brilliant idea is executed very well, and just its existence is a testament to the power of film and what one person or a team of people can do in movies. And I think that's enough to get the film to an A+.
Wow.
So, don't know if it's going to be my favorite of the year, but certainly a successful experiment. Joe, what'd you think of Boyhood?
I pretty much have to echo it. I do think that overall the acting was really good, and I think that that's kind of, I would say it's exemplified because of these actors really just being invested in these roles over time.
Mm-hmm.
So you can really see them becoming characters. I'm guessing that's kind of an element of Linklater's style. Definitely. It's just that he manages to just make this natural feel.
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure the film is necessarily trying to bombard you with themes, overly done imagery, but it's just trying to take this ultimate slice of life film in a way that I really think has never been done before, at least not to this extent. And I have to agree that in terms of an experiment, it really is definitely a testament to film. I do think some of the transitions were a little bit heavy-handed. I think originally I kind of liked the musical cues and some of the little bits of television.
When it started, I did too.
And it was cool in the beginning.
Yeah.
But at some points I was like, I wonder how much did they really have a pin on what was going to be popular, what was going to be remembered, and kind of setting it about. And I do have to agree, one thing that kind of made me a little bit torn in regards to my grade was the script itself. There's definitely some really good meat to the story, but the actual story itself is not really that amazing. But it's really more the execution that brings it up for me. And I do have to echo your A+. I think that in terms of just the scope and just the brilliant cinematography and just how these actors are able to just become these people and tell this very human, basic story, but on such a massive scope.
Yeah.
It's just something you have to see. It's just amazing. Upon reflection, will it hold quite as well? I'm not sure, but for right now, it is pretty amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a long one too. It's close to 3 hours, so I don't know,
if it's for everyone.
Watching it over and over again is necessarily the thing to do, but it's certainly as a project and as a film,
it's worth seeing.
Once, absolutely, it's an A+. Justin, what do you think?
Well, I think you guys are going to definitely see some similarities here.
That's fine.
Boyhood's one of those films where you honestly have to go in and put your expectations on hold just to take in the sheer magnitude of a project like this. It's one thing for a documentary to film subjects and follow them around for 12 years, maybe even longer. But for a film that's a work of fiction, creating characters played by actors and keeping them together for 12 years and managing to keep it and managing to make a coherent movie out of it is absolutely amazing.
Mm-hmm.
The acting is great. The story, despite the epic running time, I thought flowed very well. I do understand that I do understand your points that the transitions are a little bit heavy-handed, but I feel like it also serves as a testament to the times. And I still think that those things are universal. What will define this year over next year, and so on and so forth. And I think that was a really poignant aspect of this. I do have my gripes as well. I wish there had been a little bit more character development in some spots. I wanted some other characters to be fleshed out a little bit. But honestly, it doesn't even come close to attaining the respect and admiration I have for a project like this. And like you gentlemen, I also give it an A+.
It's just really amazing.
It really is.
But, you know, with the music cues, I guess part of my issue with that stuff is also that I think this movie is for anybody, and a lot of the people that are going to see it are going to be of an older generation that may not pick up on the music cues to tell from year to year, and sometimes I was a little confused. Okay, so, you know, he was 9 in the last scene, now he's 10. When he gets a little older, like in high school and stuff, it's easier to tell because they usually start off with a scene about, you know, them saying a specific, oh, you know, 10th grade starts today, you know, whatever. When he's younger, like from age 6 to maybe 10 or 11, I think sometimes it's hard to tell, okay, a year has passed since the last scene.
That was actually something that really confused
you know?
me. When I was watching it, the first couple of years, this kid doesn't grow.
Right.
So, like, I know that you could tell eventually that years were passing by, but sometimes it would take a while to pick up on that because for a couple of years, he doesn't look like he ages.
Yeah, he looks like he's about 6 or 7 till he's about 10. He's a small kid, you know? And the hairstyles as well when he's in high school change every year. So it's like, that's one more indicator. But I would have liked to see, like, them just put on the screen, like, age 8. Age 9, you know, whenever that year begins in the film.
Or even like 2002.
Or even 2002, 2003, yeah, right, exactly.
I probably would have been okay with the years instead of the ages, to be honest with you.
Okay.
I still think that would have been a little heavy-handed, but, I mean, I can
it would have been a more conventional way to do it, which obviously isn't Linklater's style, but I just feel it might have been a little confusing for some.
Well, it's for me.
Yeah, I think, and we're sort of even in the know on music and stuff like that, so I can only imagine, you know, somebody 30, 40 years older than us, you know, trying to figure that out.
And I agree, though. I think the story here is really the important thing because it's just a universal story about growth and the experience that I think anybody can basically relate to, even though it is from a specific period in time.
Right.
There was actually only one scene in the movie that I had a little trouble swallowing. It was actually in regards to his mother, where she does something for this guy that's working on her house, and then gives him some advice, and it comes back later, and he pretty much just announces, "You're a great person, your mom's great, listen to her," and I'm like, I liked that, but that was not realistic at all. That was the only scene that I had a real gripe with, but if there's only one scene in a long movie like this, that's something I'm willing to let go.
Yeah, that's true. And, you know, something that I thought was super interesting about how they made this film is not only did they work on the script as it went and base, you know, the kid's name is Mason, base Mason's experiences on, you know, stuff Eller was going through at the time, but they couldn't sign any of these people onto contracts because of either California law or SAG law or something says you can't do a contract for more than 7 years. So this is just an entire, like, leap of faith project that everyone just said, okay, I'm in, let's trust each other, you know, make this happen. And Linklater and Hawk even had a, you know, private sort of oral contract that if Linklater passed away during the filming, Hawk would continue along and, you know, finish it. Or if Hawk died, they would have to kill the father character off and take the story that way. It's just, it's very interesting that it even exists, you know, and that the result is so good is amazing.
I think it also really serves as a testament to actor-director loyalty.
Yeah, and Hawk stars in the Before series, so you can see, you know, these guys go way back. What year was the first Before movie? 96 or something?
I think 95.
95? Yeah. So, yeah, obviously these guys go back almost 20 years now.
Yeah.
You know? But yeah, what a good movie. And we're going to go now into another of the summer's big indie hits, and that's Calvalry. And Joe's going to tell us about that.
kind of like this one. Basically, it stars one of my favorites, Brendan Gleeson. He's kind of an actor we all like here. He plays Father James, who is introduced to a mystery as the audience is. He starts out in his pew taking confessions, and a member of his congregation says that he's going to kill him. Now, we think that he might know who it is. He says he knows who it is, but we don't know if he knows that, and we obviously don't know who it is. Now, the killer says to him that he has a week to get his affairs in order before he kills him. Not because he has anything against him personally, but because he just kind of has a grudge against the priesthood and decides to focus his anger on him. So basically, he spends the rest of the week with Father James trying to reconcile with his almost daughter, rather estranged daughter, and trying to help the different people in the town who are made up of a lot of characters, most of whom are, quite frankly, not very good people. And you're trying to figure out who is going to kill him, and if he's going to die, whether or not he is actually sorry about what happened. And his internal struggle is kind of a mystery throughout most of the film. And I think that is one of the truly powerful elements here, is that all around, this film is solidly directed, it's a very fluid story, and it has some amazing performances. Everybody in the cast is fantastic, but really the one who steals the show is Gleeson here. He is fantastic. He just makes this character seem so conflicted, so interesting, and he manages to say so much and so little at the same time. We can see the emotional cues, but we don't really know most of his thoughts, and that's something that's really intriguing here. Honestly, I thought it was a brilliant thriller, and it's one of those things that it just kind of keeps you thinking, even at the end, and it does lead to this really powerful finale. Really, it is by far probably my favorite movie to come out so far this year, which obviously spoils it being an A+.
2 A+ in one show.
I
don't think it's ever happened before on Film Fanatics. Justin, what did you think of Calvalry?
Alright, here we go. Dark humor I honestly consider one of my favorite subgenre of comedy, because it's such a difficult balance of trying to make sure that it doesn't get too serious, because if it does, it ends up being a thriller. And like I said before, it's not really an easy balance to pull off. And even though I think John Michael McDonough, the director of the film, doesn't have the same balance of it as his brother Martin, who gave us In Bruges, which we reviewed earlier in season 2, he definitely has a great concept and a great character to explore it. Gleeson gives arguably one of the best performances of this year, playing a very conflicted man, and his overall crisis of faith is nothing short of engaging. I thought though my biggest issue with it comes from the tone, which I thought the shifts were rather awkward. While it starts off with this dark and gritty aspect setting the stage for everything to come, we often will shift into this sort of darkly comedic aspect of it, and with the townspeople, who, as Joe mentioned rather perfectly, are not good people, but you are generally interested in what they have to say and how they're reacting to him. But it'll then often go from that back to the dark and gritty nature, and shift between the two throughout the movie. Unlike most movies that do this, I actually really have a respect for both. I just wish they had chosen one or the other. However, like you, Joe, I thought it was a fantastic conclusion. I'm still thinking about it. I will probably be thinking about it for the remainder of this year and probably well into the next, and which is nothing short of begging for a second viewing. But I leave it with a B+, but upon reflection between now and the Best Of show at the end of the year, I can see it easily becoming an A- or even an A.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, I honestly hope that it does, because for me, Father James Lavelle is the most interesting, tortured character we've seen on screen this year, I think. I think Gleeson plays him amazingly, as Joe mentioned. We're going to obviously go over the top 5 Brendan Gleeson performances a little bit later on in the show, but this definitely ranks among his best. The movie on the whole is just a great crackerjack mystery / thriller, and, you know, as far as the comedy elements, the comedic tone, I mean, it is there, but it is for people who like their comedy black as coffee. It is some dark stuff.
Yeah.
You know, but I gotta say, I mean, the last, 3 minutes of this film are beyond powerful. You know, it's the type of film that after it's over, the audience just sits in silence, taking it in. It's exactly what happened when I went to see it. I was the first one actually out of my seat after about 30 seconds after the credits started rolling. Walked to my car, got in, and just wept. It sort of hit me as I was walking to my car just how powerful those last few minutes are, and I just sat there, didn't want to even move. For me, it's an A+ as well. I thought it was fantastic. Justin, I have to say, I didn't really notice the tonal shifts quite as much as you. I thought it flowed pretty well together. There are some comedic elements, like I said, that are very dark, but it sort of, I thought, was in line with the rest of the thriller and the mystery aspects of the film.
I'm not saying it was out of line, I just said it was kind of awkward when we're having this funny bit, and then we'll come to this really disturbing image later on.
I mean, the laughs weren't like 22 Jump Street, doubled over, with laughter. They were, to me anyway, and to the audience I was with, they were a lot more subtle. You would hear a snicker here or a chortle there. So to me, I mean, I think that most dark comedies have that exact balance. Joe, what did you think about the tone of the movie? Did you find a shift?
I didn't really think that there was a really noticeable shift. I thought it was pretty well integrated. I think that there were some dark comedic moments, but I thought that they were more to speak to the different individual towns members and see their own bleak humor as kind of reflection upon the father, who is, for the most part, very serious.
Yeah.
Like, he takes things very seriously, whereas other people do not. I kind of viewed the film as more of a drama, but I mean, I guess it's because the comedy is so dark that it's practically drama. So, I mean, really, in terms of that, that's why I guess the jokes and the comedic scenes didn't bother me too much, because I didn't think that they took me out of the film or really were differently integrated from the tone overall. So, no, I can't say it didn't bother me too much. I thought it worked fine.
It's like I said, I didn't really bother either. I wasn't really upset about either one. I just wish there had been a steady balance between the two, or at least decided, okay, we're going to stay strictly drama, or try and handle this with a little bit more of a sense of humor.
Well, I guess the way I looked at it was, overall, it was dramatic, but there were snippets of humor. That's how I viewed it.
Which I think happens in most movies of this variety. I mean, you can look at, Wes Anderson does a lot of more dark comedy kind of thing, Grand Budapest Hotel and stuff like that. But that is more, the comedy is much more broad in those types of films,
and I think that
silly.
Most of his films are also generally more comedic, obviously.
Yeah. Right,
so
right.
That's more clearly established.
Yeah, okay, maybe that's not a great example, but I just sort of, when I think dark comedy, I sort of do think of things like Moonrise Kingdom and Grand Budapest, where, there's people killing each other, or, big chase scenes
why I'm saying
incorporated with comedy.
In regards to this, I'm guessing there are different layers of dark comedy, and this is about as dark as it gets, where it's not really silly, it's not like, oh, this guy dies and we don't really care, so it's funny that they don't care, it's like a slapsticky thing. It's just...
It's dark.
This is really, really dark.
I, for one, didn't find too much comedic with it, but the audience I was with did laugh at certain moments.
There were a couple of scenes, like a couple of the characters were sort of funny, but it was like matter of fact.
I also think part of the problem was we would see these people who would offer these subtle bits of humor, and like I said, they would usually say something kind of interesting or poignant, and then we'd never see them again. And if we did, they would be back in essentially a cameo.
I mean, I do think everybody pretty much came back around towards the end, and certainly in the last few minutes we see everybody, but I mean, I agree that maybe we don't get the most out of, say the elderly gentleman that he goes to visit, or,
could have had more of that.
Yeah, but I think part of it was the mystery element and not getting to know these characters
too
quite
much
as well, because, like most great mysteries, you have... a lot of people are possible suspects, and it's up to the audience to decide. And like you said, Joe, the father mentions that he knows who it is. Mm-hmm. Does he know? We don't know what he's actually thinking as opposed to what he's saying, which I think is part of the genius of the character and the film itself. But it's half of it is trying to figure out who done it,
but
whether he knows or not.
I would say that it doesn't really matter, though.
I was going to say, I'd
You're
say
right.
it's not really so much a mystery as much as a man exploring his last few days dealing with, as I mentioned before, a crisis of faith, and trying to bring faith to essentially a faithless town, even though ultimately culminating in the death of, ultimately wondering which is worse, retribution for the good or retribution on the good or retribution on the bad.
No, I mean, you're right. The mystery element is more of a minor one as opposed to the big picture.
Yeah.
You know, you're right. It doesn't really matter in the long run who it is that is threatening his life. It's the reactions he has, you know, in the week leading up to, you know, what is told to him to be his demise.
All that retrospection is really what it's about. The internal conflict is what's really important.
Right.
The overall theme and scope.
In terms of the whole, I think I know who did it bit. It kind of fell into my justification for a lot of the things that happened in the movie. What reason would he have not to say that? Because obviously, he's going out in the open. He's obviously not afraid of the death threat, and so on and so forth. So clearly, this doesn't. He's being relatively open about this in regards to the whole matter.
Well, the only person he says that he knows who it is to his fellow pastor. He doesn't actually say that to anybody else.
One reason why I kind of have some doubts about that is that particular scene. You see that this guy's supposed to be the one guy he actually goes to advice, and he's not really that great of a guy.
Right.
So it's almost like, would he really share these things with him? Because you can tell that with other members of his priesthood, it seems like he kind of has a sort of a shaky relationship with as well.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So, I mean, that's why, yes, I could see that, but at the same time, I feel like there's a reason why he didn't go into much detail about it. Like, he didn't actually say who it was.
Yeah. Well, Justin, I hope that you do get to give it a second shot, and maybe your grade will end up improving. I'm with Joe. I think it's one of the best movies of the year, for sure. Well, let's go to you next for our home media moment, and that is Alan Partridge.
After North Norfolk Digital is bought out and restructured by a multinational conglomerate, Alan Partridge, played by Steve Coogan, an iconic DJ for the station, discovers that he and his colleague, Pat Farrell, played by Cole Meany, must be let go. Desperate to hold on to his job, Alan betrays his coworker, only to find out later that night that Pat has returned back to the station and is holding the staff hostage in an attempt to get his job back, with Alan acting as negotiator. It's interesting looking at a movie like Alan Partridge after last year's Philomena, knowing the overall cultural impact of a character like this, and it really just goes to show how much range Coogan has as an actor. Yeah. Alan Partridge began as a simple radio sketch character and has since become a part of TV shows, spin-offs, I believe a TV movie, and even books. And from this you can really tell just how much he's become a staple in this culture. In terms of the film adaptation, I thought Coogan did a really good job of taking an otherwise dark and gritty situation and keeping it fairly lively and funny, with really witty wordplay and just a general sense of humor to the whole mess, keeping it mostly out of thriller-like territory. Admittedly, this doesn't always work, and for a few minutes it does here and there, but we usually bounce back to the original comedy that we know and love. By the end, it does do a little bit more of that, but overall, as a comedy, I thought it did the job. I'm not entirely sure how it will work for most people who are unfamiliar with the character, but I thought it worked as a quirky dark comedy, and I give it a B.
Well, it's a lot like the Sacha Baron Cohen characters that were, big hits in the UK before the Borat movie and the Bruno movie here. This Alan Partridge character, like you mentioned, is just a huge comedic phenomenon in the UK. But audiences largely will get their first taste of him with this movie. Steve Coogan is just one of my favorite comedians. And what I like the most about him is his comedy isn't necessarily one thing. It's a combination of many different things. It's not gross-out comedy, it's not necessarily a lot of pratfalls and visual gags. It's a little bit of everything. And he's so adept at it. and this character is just completely outrageous. It's a lot like the character that he plays in Hamlet 2, which is a huge guilty pleasure movie of mine from the last decade. It's hilarious. Someday I will bring it to an old classic and show you guys, maybe for Guilty Pleasure Month. But, Coogan really has made this stamp for himself in comedy, and it is great to see him branch out into the drama with Philomena and stuff like that, which he had a huge hand in, co-writing it. But a lot of American audiences now know him because of Philomena, and I would love for them to also know his comedy. It's not for everybody. It can be dirty at times, it's very over the top, like I said, but for me, I thought it was hilarious from start to finish. It's a great concept. It does veer a little bit into that thriller-like territory you mentioned towards the end, but for me, it's an A-. I really enjoyed it. Joe?
I feel like this is almost the Philomena Part 2 review. No, but I actually really enjoyed this one. I thought that I've always been kind of a fan of like a lot of the dry British humor, and I feel like with Coogan, he actually has this really large branch of humor, like you mentioned. He actually covers a lot of ground. I do feel like for the most part it works. Some of it's not going to work for everybody because he tries just about everything. I did like the way it kind of slowly devolves and gets kind of really ridiculous at the end. Maybe that's too much to swallow for some people, but I was fine with it. I thought the performances were great. Not really knowing a lot about the character, I really liked him. I thought he was really cool. I wanted to see him succeed. I just thought the synopsis, just for the premise of the film, was hilarious. Like, I had a hard time practically trying not to crack up as Justin was reading. So it's good. It's good stuff, and I'm really happy that you get to see Colm Meaney making this comeback.
Colm Meaney's great in this movie too, Absolutely. Right? As the not the villain per se, but his co-host,
the really eccentric guy who's basically lost it. But
right.
Just like the exchange between the two of them is really, I think, the center of what makes the movie so funny. I also liked a lot of the pop culture references. Like you had some stuff from West Wing there, and Godfather. Just like a lot of film references, just to get at that for obviously people that have knowledge for those sort of things. So there's a lot of jokes you'll get. I think there's something good for some people here. I can't promise that everyone will like it, but I think if you give it a shot, you might have a good chance of enjoying it. Personally, I give it a B+.
Nice. Right in between.
That's right.
The way that this film, skewers celebrity and the 24-hour news cycle and that kind of stuff, it's just so spot on, And, are you guys at all familiar with Coogan's more comedic side? Because we've seen him do a couple of these dramatic roles recently.
A little bit with Tropic Thunder, but...
Yeah, that's true, which he's only in for a little bit, but that that was a great role. And I would say probably the first time I ever saw him in anything. And it was one of those moments where I was just like, okay, who is this guy? What else has he done?
And why don't I know more?
And why don't I know more about him? Exactly.
Yeah, I hadn't seen much of him. I think Tropic Thunder is probably the earliest. He's one of those actors I'd seen him pop up in things, and I liked him, but I didn't know the name.
You couldn't take him out of a crowd.
Yeah,
right.
When he comes up, he's usually funny. Now I know, because of Philomena.
Yeah.
And Alan Partridge.
Well, and he was like the straight man in Philomena.
I know. It was pretty much a dramatic performance for most of it.
Yeah. So she herself was kind of funny.
Yeah, actually.
While being serious, but he was pretty straight ahead, drama for him. So I thought that was it was definitely the two very different sides of Steve Coogan, to put those movies next to each other. But hopefully people check it out. I think it's a funny movie. All right, well, let's move into our top 5, and this week we're doing the Brendan Gleeson performances based on our enjoyment of Calvalry earlier in the show, and like Joe mentioned, we are just all kind of big fans of Gleeson. So I'll go ahead and start this one, as we do 5 through 2 usually. My number 5 is Ken from In Bruges. We talked about this movie, like Justin mentioned, earlier this year in our old classic, right? Was that a listener's choice old classic?
It was a listener's choice, yeah.
And Joe had not seen that before, so...
I knew the lines.
Yeah.
Scenes, but I did not know the movie.
Yeah, he is great in this movie, plays very, very well off of Colin Farrell. And it's one of these movies where any scene that he's not in, the movie suffers a little bit, I feel like. Number 4 is Alistair Mad Eye Moody from 3 of the Harry Potter films. I think it's just incredible in that vast world of Potter to have a standout supporting character, you know, and not even supporting, almost cameo status. You know, he's in a few scenes here and there.
He was fairly integral to his first movie.
Yeah.
That's about it, though.
But that was about it. You know, every other time you saw him, he was just sort of, you know, like almost an afterthought. But he really, you know, put a stamp on it and made it his own. My number 3 is Sergeant Jerry Boyle from The Guard. And this is a film from the same director as Calvalry. And their first pairing, it's him and Don Cheadle. And this is a very dark comedy in the vein, I think, more of what we were talking to before with like the Wes Anderson type stuff.
In a more traditional sense.
More traditional sense. It's quirky characters. You know, he is sort of the not aggressive, but he's just a smart ass, you know, and a wise guy. And he gets paired with this super straight-laced Don Cheadle, who does not want to team up with him on this case, and they do, and it's just a really good movie. My number 2 is his portrayal of Winston Churchill from Into the Storm, and this is not the movie that we referred to earlier this year, the tornado,
Fire-nado.
the Fire-nado movie. They didn't have Winston Churchill, you know, go up in a Fire-nado.
One of the best of the year, for sure. Not like Gleeson is Fire-nado.
Yeah, that's right. Justin gave that movie an F, by the way, Into the Storm.
It's a C-. Don't
It's
listen to
definitely not that movie. HBO did a movie in 2009 based on the World War II era Winston Churchill. And sort of a little bit of the aftermath as well. It sort of goes back and forth from the present to the past. And it's just one of these performances, like we talked about with Hitchcock a couple of weeks ago with Anthony Hopkins. I mean, he really becomes Winston Churchill in this movie. It's a great performance. So that's my number 2. Joe, let's go to you for 5 through 2.
All right, well, my number 5 is actually him playing Alistair Moody, particularly in the fourth one, Goblet of Fire. Mad Eye Moody is one of my favorite characters from Harry Potter. Actually, I tend to like most of the defenses against the dark arts professors, good and bad ones. Spoilers, you know. But really, I love this character, and actually, this was one of the earlier performances I'd seen from Gleeson. I don't think it's actually the first, but it was kind of cool to get to see this actor that I knew playing a character that I really liked. And it was probably one of the first really big impressions that I got from him. And I thought he really embodied the character well, and like you said, made him stand out.
Yeah.
My number 4 is actually Hamish from Braveheart. He basically plays the young best friend of Mel Gibson's character, William Wallace. They kind of reunite, and is basically his number 1 guy in the revolution to try to take back Scotland from the English. He's kind of more of the comedic relief, very different for him. Kind of plays like not a very intelligent character, but a really the big, strong, muscle-bound guy. But when you see him, makes an impression. He's got the big, full red beard. Probably the earliest performance on the list. Just really, really good character. I thought he did a good job with that. Pretty iconic. Number 3 is Monk from Gangs of New York. This guy plays this really dark character. You're not sure if you like him. He's pretty much almost portrayed as like the scum of the earth when Liam Neeson talks to him briefly, like, you know, you want to try and fight with us? Well, how much money's in it? Like, he doesn't seem like he has a cause for anybody. But later on in the film, his relationship with Leonardo DiCaprio's character actually helps him evolve into a better person who actually stands for a cause. Gangs of New York is one of my favorite films, possibly my favorite Scorsese film, and really just a great little role for Gleeson in that film as well.
Nice.
Number 2 is actually Ken from In Bruges. You know, really, I think you said it best when really he elevates every scene that he's in, and even though Fiennes and Farrell perform well in their scenes, really, the scenes where he's interacting with either of them, or both of them, or he's just in a scene by himself, are really the best scenes in the movie.
He's so likable in that movie.
He's so likable, and he really is that connecting force that balances out both men in the conflict. He's just kind of cool things down. He's really the crux of the story. Just a really great role for him.
Nice. Justin, how about you? 5 through 2.
All right, here we go. Number 5 is, I believe his name is General Brigham, Edge of Tomorrow. I thought it was a very short role, but it was a pivotal role in terms of setting the stage. He presents Tom Cruise with this seemingly unfair scenario, but it helps establish him as this reluctant hero that grows as the film goes on. My only real regret with this performance is I wish it was longer. He does come back later on in the film, but but I still would have loved more.
Yeah, unfortunately, this character doesn't need to be in that much of it, but you're right. It's a great performance.
Steals the scene,
yeah.
for sure.
My number 4 is Wiglaf from the Beowulf movie in 2007. In terms of just mocap and motion capture, that is, and just serving as the sidekick character to Beowulf, really good job. Keeps it down to earth, but makes it his own. And eventually, even though he's sort of a sidekick, he ends up being the one that carries the overall story. My number 3 is Abbott Kellick from The Secret of Kells. I thought really, really good voice actor work, and really hits home the message of living outside of fear of censorship. And my number 2 is Father James from Calvalry. One of the best performances of this year. Can't quite say it's my best. We'll talk about that one later down the line this year. Really powerful, really interesting character, really complicated character, and as I mentioned in my review, I'm still thinking about that finale.
Yeah, that's definitely one that sticks with you. Before I get to my number 1, I just want to mention, because we've all sort of mentioned movies that maybe people don't even realize Brendan Gleeson is in. This guy is in so many movies over the last, say, 20-plus years. I mean, Braveheart was about 20 years ago, almost.
Yeah, actually.
He's done Cold Mountain, 28 Days Later, The Company You Keep, all the way up to The Smurfs 2. I mean, he is just kind of everywhere, and he's a very undersung actor, and I think that's why we wanted to do this top 5. My number 1, no surprise, is Father James Lavelle from Calvalry. What is there to say? I said it in my review that he's the most complicated character I think that we've seen on screen this year, and he just would not be that same character if it was anybody but Gleeson. Joe?
Really, I have to agree with Dan here. Number 1 is Calvary, Father James. Just a really powerful performance. It's amazing how much he can do with so much subtle emotion to conceive so much power.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, really, I agree. He plays a very complicated character. Really leaves a lot to be thought of, a lot to be investigated, a lot of discussion. Really, as well done as the film is, I think it is greatly elevated by how powerful his performance is, as well as how well written the character was and the directing. So it all tied together with Gleeson, and it's definitely number 1 performance for me.
Yeah, I agree. Justin?
And my number 1 is Ken from In Bruges. I thought, yes, I do like Father James' character, but I also really like the amount of humor, heart, and still this aura of darkness that Gleeson brings to the Glenn character in In Bruges. He starts out as sort of like his friend, and then we find out there might be a little bit more to it than that, posing this sort of deeper question of where truly do his loyalties lie. And I feel like that adds a whole new layer of suspense to the overall story that I honestly don't think would have, same as with Calvary, would have really worked had it not been for him.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody drops C-bombs like him.
Ever.
That is
Ever.
true. Yeah, I think it's safe to say that most of these movies would not quite be as good as they were without Gleeson.
I don't think so.
And his character. All right, well, let's move on to the final portion of our show, and that is, of course, the triple feature of old films. Joe's going to talk about Batman Under the Red Hood, his choice for old classic. Justin's going to talk about our Oscar A to Z film, Anchors Aweigh, and I'm going to start it off with This Is the End. This is a 2012 apocalyptic comedy starring Seth Rogen, James Franco, Jonah Hill, Jay Baruchel, and Danny McBride, among others, as hyper-realistic versions of themselves. Craig Robinson, I didn't mention, he's one of the main ones as well. Basically, it starts out as Seth and Jay, childhood friends. Jay comes to visit Seth in L.A., sort of to mend some fences, their relationship a little bit strained. Seth drags him to a party at James Franco's house, which he's not really thrilled about, and it's there that the apocalypse starts. All hell breaks loose in California, and that's where we lose the majority of our cameoed actors, Rihanna, Michael Cera, Kevin Hart, many, many others, in one way or another, most of them very comedic. For me, this was a very inventive comedy. It was very smart. Rogen wrote it with his partner Evan Goldberg and directed it. And I just thought, what a clever concept to have everyone be themselves, but yet, everyone with their own affectations and, exaggerated personas, as it were. I think here's another dark comedy. It's like the show of dark comedies.
Yeah,
there's definitely a lot of things happening in this that are not typically hilarious. There's some demon action. There's some infighting with each other, and loyalties and friendships, and I don't know. I think it's a really great concept done well. It goes a little bit off the rails at the end, but this was my third watch of this movie. I saw it twice in theaters and then again for the new classic. And for me, it still maintains how strong it was. In fact, even a little bit stronger than when I first saw it. I gave it a B+ then, and it's an A- for me now. Joe, what did you think of This Is the End?
Well, I think that I really like a lot of these actors. I mean, Seth Rogen, Jay Baruchel, Jonah Hill, James Franco. I generally like a lot of these guys. I like their comedic timing with each other. I think they have great chemistry. I also really like the whole concept of these actors playing hyper-realized versions of themselves. I've seen that done a couple times. I like that. I like when actors can poke fun of themselves. That's usually a good sign of good character, I think, and can often make for good comedy because it's actually kind of real. And that was actually the strongest thing about this movie for me. I liked a lot of the jokes about Hollywood and acting and just their personal lives and their place with each other. That was really funny, and the basis for that comedy is great. And I think it's some of the strongest elements for the story and for the characters to develop. What I didn't really like, actually, was, kind of like with If I Stay, the hook. I thought the post-apocalyptic, or rather apocalyptic element of the film, while it served as a good backdrop, I did not feel that it was that well integrated with the film. The only time I thought it really worked well was when Jonah Hill gets possessed. They actually interact with some of the elements of these characters being hyper-realized versions of themselves, as well as taking into account the religious and philosophical ideas.
That is one of my favorite scenes of the movie.
That's probably
without question
the best scene because it combines both and it's fused. Had they done that more, I think it would have been a much better comedy. I still think it's original, and I still think the characters are being very genuine for the most part. I do agree. I don't like the ending. I thought it was kind of a cop-out.
It goes a little off the deep end,
More ways than one. I didn't like the resolution quite as much as some. Overall, though, I think it's a good comedy. Definitely would recommend it. I just wish they had kind of integrated the apocalyptic elements and the religious ideas with the actual character's story and interactions. So I leave this one with a B.
Okay. Justin, what do you think?
Improvisation is almost synonymous with comedy these days, and it's really in this movie that it shines as front and center. According to director and star Rogen, about half of the film is improvised, and they managed to do it without compromising the tone of the film, which a lot of actors unfortunately do nowadays. I thought this was, but that said, I think it was a very original and unique piece. I thought it was really clever that they had the actors playing caricatures or hyper-realized satirical versions of themselves. And for the most part it works. I think they do go a little too far at times, but they usually bounce back with something even crazier and more often than not even funnier, such as Possession of Jonah Hill.
It was good.
Unfortunately, it all ends up with, as what you both mentioned, a very, very safe, very odd, I'd say, conclusion. But as a whole, I mean, you really got to appreciate somebody doing something original and different with comedy that I hope that somebody tries again later down the line, and like Joe, I give it a B.
Nice. Well, they're going to try it again themselves with This Is the End 2, which they'll be filming, I guess, probably next year. And the basic concept for that is they're going to the premiere of This Is the End in the beginning of it. I don't know if it's going to be another apocalypse thing. I hope it's not. That would be silly. But I love this concept. Justin, when you mentioned sometimes they go too far, in what way do you mean? Like, do you mean when they insult each other, or?
I think it's one of those, like, some things sound funnier being pitched or being written down than actually, like, an actual execution.
Do you have an example, actually?
I'm sorry, I guess I should have led with that. For example, the video diary, when they're talking about how they're surviving, and they have a unique beverage for the lack of disturbing our audience.
Yeah, that wasn't my favorite part.
I agree. I kind of like where they were going with that, but then they kind of used it a few more times, and then they sort of dropped it. Like, it wasn't a very well-developed idea.
Yeah.
It would have been cool if that had actually been more consistent with all their perspectives, but I think what they did it once, maybe came back to another time, and that was about it.
Yeah. Well, and, to speak to the, making fun of each other in the improv kind of thing, because this is where I thought you were going with it when you said, sometimes they went too far. There was sort of a spoken rule on the set that no topic is off limits. If you want to talk about, this thing about this person or this thing. go for it.
All shots legal.
You know, all shots legal. Rogan said, I think he was on Conan when he said that some feelings were hurt, you know, at the end of the day. But, I mean...
kind of a roast.
It sort of had that roast vibe. You know, they were making fun of, you know, Jonah being too Hollywood now, or, you know, James Franco being secretly gay, or Jay Baruchel being, you know, a loser, and the guy nobody knows.
And you know, Seth Rogen's fat.
Seth Rogen's fat, has an annoying laugh, you know.
Danny's
the worst, right? You know, I that was some of my favorite stuff, and I think, Joe, from your review, you probably felt the same.
Because if that's the point, you know, they actually had some pot shots taken, maybe some people got their feelings hurt, but regardless, I think it produced the best comedy that was the most genuine, not just comedically, but from a human perspective for the story.
For the characters.
And the characters.
Right.
Which was what I really liked about the movie.
Especially when you had those dynamics of, like, you know, Jay doesn't like Jonah.
Yeah.
And, you know, Franco doesn't necessarily like Jay because he's taking, you know, time away from Seth with him, you know. And it's like, it all was very... And it was done in such a way that I don't think made the audience uncomfortable because it was like a roast. It was sort of done in that style. And Joe, I know you like the Pineapple Express sequel idea that they gave in the movie as well.
That was funny, and that was them, you know, once again taking one of their ideas and their projects and kind of making fun of it a little bit, taking you know, shots at some things people didn't like about it.
Right.
You know, I thought that was kind of cool, and I actually did kind of like the idea for the second one. I thought it was more over the top and silly, kind of like this weird, like, anti-drug action thriller thing.
Right.
I thought that would be great, like kind of along the lines of 21 Jump Street or something like that.
Yeah, I could see it. Starring Jonah Hill.
He'd probably be in there then, yeah.
These guys know how to do that sort of style, I think, very well. All right, well, Joe, let's go to you and the old classic, which is Batman Under the Red Hood.
Yes, this one is actually based on a comic that was made back in the late 2000s, around 08-09, and it basically follows Batman. It starts off with the second Robin, Jason Todd, being killed by the Joker. I'd say this is spoilers, but this is...
Happens pretty early on.
You'll figure it out. It's kind of the basis.
Yeah.
And then obviously it's a big tragedy for Batman, also based on a pretty big event from the comics back in the 80s. Cuts to 5 years later, and Batman has to contend with this new vigilante called the Red Hood, taking on the name of one of the aliases of the Joker before he became the Joker. As this guy tries to take on the different drug dealers and criminal organizations, putting them under his wing, but doing so really violently. So as Batman's trying to figure out who this individual is to take him down, he also has to contend with this other crime boss, the Black Mask, who is the primary rival against the Red Hood's business interests, as well as his own, and as well as contending with the Joker. Now, this movie is actually kind of one of those areas where I think that it genuinely improved upon the source material, actually fixed some little continuity errors that were a little bit distracting, like you don't have Superboy punching the interdimensional rifts to bring somebody back to life. But really, this film was sold by some really good writing. It's formed from the solid foundations of the comics, but it makes it relatively accessible for people. I think that the voice works great, the directing's really good here, the animation's very fluid, some really good action, and some really good dynamics for these characters. You really get to see an emotional side of how conflicted Batman is about some things that have happened to him and people in his life and how it affects them. You've got Joker as a really menacing villain. You know, the Red Hood's a very interesting character. The only real big negative for the movie is that even for people that have not read the comics, I feel like the twist is pretty obvious from early on. If it's supposed to be a twist, I'm not really sure. There are some fluid elements here that don't quite match up, but overall I do think it is one of the better DCAU animated films that have been released recently, and I give it a B+.
Part of the reason I admire DC Comics as much as I do comes from the fact that they focus more on the themes rather than simple entertainment. In the case of Under the Red Hood, that has to do with change. Obviously, Grayson had abandoned the Robin uniform to take on Nightwing, and DC Comics was left with a new Robin. Most of the fans, as far as Joe's told me, and as far as my personal research has gone, he was not well received.
This is true.
Resulting in a relatively grisly death.
But for those that don't know, one of the reasons this was such a big deal, not to interject, Justin, is that this is the first time the fans thought that the character was so disliked that a lot of the writers decided we didn't know what to do with him, so they said we're actually going to have a poll. And this is back before internet. They said, call into this line, you dial 1 here to dial 2 here to kill him, you know, for this big storyline. We won't write the issue until we have the votes in. and they voted for him to killed.
I vaguely remember this.
1988.
Yeah, I feel like, yeah, okay.
So that's why it was a big deal.
Wow.
I believe it was also spoofed in a Simpsons episode.
That's, I'm sure, very possible. They spoofed many dial-phone lines in Simpsons.
Sorry. But, I mean, in the case of that, this happened, and then we focus on the idea of Batman struggling with this big change in his life and how it's impacted him 5 years later after the fact. And I feel like that really set the stage for this deeper story than we get in a lot of the Batman films, outside of the Nolan ones and other things like that. And we get this really tight, action-packed 75 minutes. Joe, I do agree with you that I think the twist was a little too obvious, much like in Mask of the Phantasm. But I feel like just 20 minutes or so to flesh things out would have made a lot of difference. See, the only real big issue I have with this, other than that fact, comes from the idea that I really didn't like the integration of CGI into this. Thought it was really cheap. I really didn't think it gelled that well, and it just sort of felt out of place with everything else.
I thought that was fairly minor, to be honest.
Which is why I said it was a minor gripe.
Okay.
But as a whole, I thought it was easily the best animated Batman film since Mask of the Phantasm, and I give it an A-.
You know, I would have given it an A- too, but I've seen it about 20 times. So I'll be honest, I don't like it quite as much because of that, but it is a very good one. I thought about it A-, but I'm like, I didn't. I've seen it so many times.
Yeah.
I gotta let it sit.
Well, this is now the second animated Batman film you've brought to old classic, Mask of the Phantasm being the first. The thing that struck me immediately about this one is that for something with such a direct-to-video type budget, it looks really good.
Well, that's because Bruce Timm and his team usually have a lot of effort put into their work for the story and the animation.
Yeah.
They do their best.
It shows because it looked good. I didn't really notice the bad CGI as much as you did, I guess. I thought it looked all right.
It was the plane mostly.
Yeah.
Like the bat plane, maybe some of the buildings, but it's no 90s Spider-Man animated series.
No, I mean, knowing that it was direct to DVD, it's like, you can sort of forgive certain, things like that. But I really liked the look of it. I liked how dark it was. And for those reasons, I like it more than Mask of the Phantasm.
Oh, wow.
The thing that sort of struck me about this one is, as a relative novice to the Batman world, other than the big franchise films, is that I was a little bit confused. They did a lot of back and forth with the different Robins, and I had to ask you a couple times during the movie, okay, now which Robin is this, and what's happening? So to me it was a little bit confusing. I loved Secretary Daria. The secretary was like the spinning. It was like Daria Morgendorffer grew up,
Black Mask's assistant,
and became Black Mask's assistant. She said the most dry, deadpan. He's telling her these awful things. She's like, "Very good, sir."
It's like, they stole my guns. They destroyed them.
They
sir.
destroyed them,
what?
sir. Yeah, very, very great. I picked that out right away and dubbed her Secretary Daria. But no, I really enjoyed the film, and for me, it's a B+.
That's good.
So, I mean, I'm glad. I'm sure there's tons more that are out there.
Yes,
in the DC world.
I'll try to spread them out, but there's a couple I'd like to introduce along the way.
Okay.
Maybe some Superman ones or something you might like.
Oh, cool.
So one last thing before we leave. What do you guys feel about this version of the Joker played by John DiMaggio? A little bit different than Mark Hamill or even Heath Ledger or Jack Nicholson.
He was not among my favorite versions of the Joker.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen all of them, obviously, but, there is the Mark Hamill one in Mask of the Phantasm. I guess for me, it's...
Was Bender?
I'm sort of... Well, I like Bender, yes. I'm just sort of over the Joker, I guess.
So you're tired then?
Well, as an outsider,
mm-hmm.
I know that there's a ton of villains.
Yeah, let me tell you this right now.
Tell me.
You're not alone. I actually know some people that feel that certain villains just get shoved in every storyline.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you've got tons. You've got Scarecrow,
right.
Riddler, Two-Face, Penguin. There's dozens
the
of
staples.
them. And even more obscure ones like Orca. I mean, she's a freaking...
Yeah, don't know her.
She's, a killer whale woman.
Okay.
So let's put it this way. There's variety.
Right.
And you're right, Joker, once again. But to be fair, he's kind of integral to the storyline.
Well, no, I understand that, the Under the Red Hood series or the book is about him.
Mm-hmm.
So makes sense to have him. I guess I would have liked to see somebody else, you know. But no, I mean, I didn't mind the interpretation. It's certainly different from the ones I had seen before. But I definitely would say I prefer Mark Hamill's in Mask of the Phantasm to this one.
Most people would.
Okay.
Well, you saw Black Mask. He was different.
Did I see Black Mask?
Yeah, crime boss, you know.
Oh, the character. I thought...
With that.
That went over my head for a second. For some reason, I thought there was a Batman movie called Black Mask. No, yes, Black Mask. I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was... I liked him. He was good.
What do you think, Justin?
Honestly, I liked John D... Oh my goodness. Honestly, I liked John DiMaggio's version. It was different, but it was very him. Mm-hmm. He added this level of... He had this level of darkness, but also with a bit more humor than we see more commonly in the Joker. Hamill's version is very zany. I'd argue Ledger's version is a bit more sadistic.
Nicholson plays himself.
Nicholson plays himself, as he does in almost every movie.
Himself with makeup.
Exactly.
It's pretty much.
But DiMaggio really did something different with it, and I enjoyed that. I definitely understand the criticisms people have with it, but I thought it was a very unique performance from him.
No, I liked him too. I thought he's one of the scarier versions of the Joker, actually.
So he ranks pretty high for you in the Joker realm?
Well, I mean, I like all the other guys better.
Okay.
But to be fair, it's kind of hard to mess up the Joker. I mean, even Cesar Romero did a great Joker. You know, so that's the great thing, is you can interpret this character a lot of different ways, and still, as long as you get the crazy and the fact that he's a killer, you get something.
You get it down.
You get something. You know.
Huh. All right, we're going to close the show with Justin telling us about our Oscar A to Z, and that is Anchors Aweigh. This was nominated in 1945 for 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Actor for Gene Kelly, and 3 others in the technical category, cinematography, and 2 of the music ones, no surprise. Justin, let's hear about Anchors Aweigh.
After Joe and Clarence, played by Gene Kelly and Frank Sinatra, are awarded medals for their heroics in war, they set out to Hollywood to enjoy a 4-day leave. Along the way, they encounter a young Navy supporter named Donald, played by a very young Dean Stockwell, who's wandered away from his Aunt Susie, played by Katherine Grayson. However, as the two begin to bear witness to Susie's singing abilities and her aspirations to collaborate with the composer Jose Turbi, the two set out to MGM to give her the audition she desires. Anchors Aweigh is a film with a reputation, most notably for the iconic scene where Gene Kelly is dancing with the lovably selfish Jerry Mouse. This scene's delightful, though arguably out of place, much with several of the other fantasy sequences that are in the film, but that still leaves the rest of the film. As a whole, the film kind of goes in a number of bizarre areas, and more than a couple instances borders on, if not completely on, military propaganda. But there's still something to be said about the grandiose nature of it, and some interesting cinematography sprinkled in here and there whenever appropriate. When you think that these musical numbers are going to be straightforward, they add this really interesting camera angle perspective that really helps draw the audience in and appreciate it. Unfortunately, I wish the music was as memorable, but the dancing and the chemistry between Kelly and Sinatra is wonderful. As a whole, I can't say it's completely deserving of the reputation it's warranted over time, but I can see why this is a must for most classic movie buffs, and I give it a B-.
Yeah, for me, first of all, I didn't really care about the military stuff. I mean, it was in 1945, World War II had just ended.
Where there's no fire.
I was fine with the military stuff. No, but for me, what really bothered me was just the songs were not that good or memorable. The dancing is great, of course. Gene Kelly, always good with the kids. He has a few memorable numbers with children, and including the fantasy sequence with Jerry Mouse. And his chemistry with Sinatra's good, I'll give you that. But yeah, the story isn't that amazing. And for me, the number one thing a musical needs is good songs, especially when they come at you literally every scene. There's at least one. So for me, I give it a B- as well. It's certainly, worth a watch if you're into old school musicals, but just the music's not all that great. Joe?
Really, I would say it's primarily held up by Gene Kelly.
Mhm.
I think that he really is definitely deserving of the attention that he got for this role. I think Frank Sinatra, though very young, actually does a very good job. These guys are both
Yeah, he's
talented.
really young too.
Yeah, really, their singing was, of course, good, as you'd expect. I think really the strongest element was the dancing. But there also was some really cool cinematography. There were some really great camera tricks. I like the whole mirror reflection. They kind of used that a lot. There was also some cool editing by cutting the film different ways to impose certain elements. Plus, obviously, the animation coming over was really good. But I would argue that those dream sequences, as cool and experimental as they were very distracting from the overall film.
Mhm.
Really didn't jive very well. The characters were okay, but the story was honestly kind of weak and underdeveloped, and it didn't really help the fact that it went into a bunch of different directions.
Right.
I have to say, I did like the technical aspects, I did like the performances, and I liked some of the dancing, but the music wasn't that great. Really kind of was hard to pay attention, and the story was very weak. So I'm going to go slightly lower than you guys and give it a C+.
Okay. Yeah, the fantasy sequences, which I very much enjoyed. I mean, I always love early style animation on top of live action. I think that's cool. But it loses the entire rest of the story then when they do that.
And as the film progresses, it becomes more about the dream sequences,
Right.
though the story gets completely lost by the end.
Right, right. And it doesn't really have a super long ending number like an American in Paris, which we talked about a few weeks ago, but that's because the fantasy sequences sort of take the place of that.
Yeah.
The fantasy sequences go on, in some instances, 10, 12 minutes, And we did look this up during the movie because it really bothered me that Jerry the Mouse was speaking.
Mm-hmm.
So for those, that are familiar with that aspect of the film, it was supposed to be Mickey Mouse, and Roy Disney decided not to give MGM, the rights to the character, and that's why MGM went with their own Jerry Mouse. So, if you've seen that clip before and wondered why is Jerry speaking in this, he doesn't talk in the cartoons, that's primarily why. But I did like that scene.
No,
it just didn't add, it would be cool if it was a music video,
Yes.
and you could see that scene only and detach, the rest of the movie from it.
that probably was the best part of the movie.
Mhm.
The problem is it doesn't really fit
doesn't
with the rest
fit.
of the movie.
It's never brought up again, and
It's kind of what they call a big lipped alligator.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, well, that is going to do it for the show. For you watching at home or on your computer or wherever you are, let us know what you thought of the new setup. It's not something we're going to do every week, but maybe if we get some good feedback on it every so often, we'll try a video show for you guys. Next week we'll be back with a regular audio show for you. And that's going to do it for this week. Thanks so much for listening. You can check us out on Twitter at Film Fanatics Pod. The Facebook group is Film Fanatics with an exclamation point, and you can always comment in the YouTube page for Old Classic if you have an old classic that you'd like us to check out for the show. So, thanks for listening. Bye!